Lord, you are more precious than silver. Lord, you are more costly than gold. Lord, you are more beautiful than diamonds, and nothing I desire compares with you. God will make a way where there seems to be no way. He works in ways we cannot see. He will make a way for me. He will be my guide, hold me closely to his side, with love and strength for each new day. He will make a way. He will make a way. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul. Rejoice, take joy, my King, in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear.
Hello, boys and girls. It's me, Steve, again. I want to talk to you today about a boy named Eutychus. You can call him Euty for short if you want to. Eutychus. Now, before I talk to you about Eutychus, I want to talk to you about Jimmycus. Well, Jimmy, 'cause he was my brother. And Jimmy, when we were kids, well, have you ever been sleepy in church? When that preacher just keeps talking and talking, you know, 'cause I know how to do that, you get a little bit sleepy. And well, when we were teenagers, all the teenagers would sit up front. There was about 3 rows full of teenagers where I went to church when I was in high school. We had a lot of young people and we had a lot of fun, but we also had this little thing that would come over us while we were listening to the preacher. And you know, he wasn't all that long-winded really, but you know, sometimes when you're a teenager you just can't keep your eyes open. Have you ever had that feeling where you get sleepy and you just start closing your eyes and your head goes down, and the next thing you know you put your head up so fast because you start to fall asleep, and then you keep doing that, and you get lower and lower, and finally well, I don't know if you whistle or not, but I tell you what, one day as we were sitting up there with all those teenagers and about 3 rows of us, I was sitting directly behind my brother, and I watched his head start doing that, dropping down, kept getting lower and lower and lower, and everybody was listening to the preacher, so there wasn't much noise, even though it was a pretty big congregation. A lot of people were there. Just the preacher. And for Jim, that was quiet enough. Because Jimmy, he started losing it and losing it and losing it. And pretty soon, he went, bam! He went over and hit his head on the back of the pew in front of him. He hit it so hard, everybody heard it, and everybody in the whole congregation felt it. And he sat right back up. I'm awake, I'm awake. He didn't say it out loud, but you could tell. He sat up and just kind of looked back and forth, and you know what? He wasn't sleepy anymore. He was awake for the whole rest of the sermon. But it was funny, and all the teenagers that knew what happened, oh, we just laughed about that forever. It's not really that funny to fall asleep in church, but it happens. And it's not really that funny when you bang your head, but it happens. And you know, things like that are even in the Bible times. Even with the Apostle Paul, who was one of the great preachers of the Bible, preached all over the world, and everybody came out to hear Paul preach. And this is what happened with this story that I want to read to you from the Bible about Eutychus. In Acts chapter 20, Paul was traveling around preaching in different places. And it says, on the first of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. Don't you just hate when the preacher keeps talking and keeps talking all the way till midnight? I know how it is. I know you want to get it over with so you can get out of there. But it even happened with Paul. He preached until midnight. So you can imagine that people might get sleepy. Their eyes might be closing. Oh, I can't keep my head up. Boom. That's the way it worked. And old Eutychus, he started getting sleepy. There were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together. And in a window sat a certain young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep. He was overcome by sleep, and as Paul continued speaking, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. Boy, I bet they wish he had a pew in front of him to slam his head on. But he didn't. He went out the back. He went out the window. He fell 3 floors, 3 stories to the ground. And Paul, after they took him up dead, went down in verse 10, and he fell on him, and embracing him said, "Do not trouble yourselves, for his life is in him." Now when he had come up and had broken bread and eaten, he talked a long while, even till daybreak, and then he departed. And they brought in the young man alive, and they were not a little comforted. That means they were a lot comforted. They were very happy, because it was a... Imagine if somebody dropped over dead in church on Sunday morning. You would just... Everybody would be crying, everybody would be upset, everybody would be calling for, you know, the fire department, the ambulance, and trying to figure out what happened. It would just be a terrible thing. And here this young man falls asleep, and he falls out the window 3 floors. That's a long way. And he was dead. But Paul went down, laid on him, and his life came back into him. Paul did miracles because he was an apostle of Jesus. Jesus had given his apostles that power to do miracles to show that what they were saying was true. We are from God. God did send us. God gave us this message about Jesus raised from the dead. And by the way, Eutychus is also an example of people that were raised from the dead by the power of Jesus. Because Jesus was raised from the dead, because Jesus has the power of life, because Paul was a preacher of Jesus and had the powers that Jesus gave him to show that the word is true. Paul raised up Eutychus, even though he had fallen dead from 3 floors up. That's a good thing to know. So even if you fall asleep in church and bang your head, you can still be saved. You can still believe in Jesus. And even if something bad happens to you, and I hope it doesn't, but even if you die, even if I die, we can have the hope of Jesus raising us up from the dead. And we'll be just like new. And we'll live forever. Isn't that a wonderful thought? That's why we talk about all these resurrections. We've talked about Lazarus, and we've talked about Dorcas, and we've talked about Eutychus, and of course we've always, the whole time, been talking about Jesus. He gave his life so that we might live, and not just for a few days here on earth, or a few years, or even a few decades, not even for 120 years. I don't know if you know anybody that's 120 years old, but I can imagine that if we did, we'd hear about it in the news. But you can live forever. I can live forever because Jesus can raise the dead. Oh, that's the wonderful story that's true.